How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with this. And that's what the I Am Real world's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. Brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Welcome, everybody. It's Chasing Giants, brought to you by buyafarm.com. This is Terry Peer, and I got Don Higgins. We're in eastern Illinois, and this is about the closest thing to deer camp we ever see, isn't it?
It is. We're sitting in a motel room in Marshall, Illinois. Not far from where you hunt, Terry, and it's right in the middle of gun season here, Saturday evening of gun season. And we got to get this over with. You can get to bed. You got to get up early tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to try to go back at it tomorrow morning. But, yeah, this spot here, a lot of outer-staters come in because this is kind of the people that are hunting probably within a 45-minute, hour radius of here. This is probably the central hub that's got a decent hotel and restaurants and stuff. So get to see quite a bit of hunters. There's quite a few bucks out in the parking lot. When we pulled in today, somebody had – I didn't get to walk over to the truck and look at it, but somebody had a ginormous – it was one of the largest six-pointers I've ever seen, and huge mass. So hopefully that guy will be around tomorrow that I can go check that out. But I'm not seeing as many out-of-state hunters this year as what we've normally seen this time of year. I'm not sure why. I do know deer numbers are down. I don't know. This area did get hit with EHD. Not like it did in 2012, but it did get hit. So we'll see. I'm going back out tomorrow.
Well, hope you have some luck.
Yep. So I know you've gotten on Higgins Outdoors Facebook page with your rut report. You've had a lot of people creating some dialogue about understanding the rut, and maybe we should just kind of back up just a little bit and do a quick once-over of kind of the dialogue over the last week that you've had on there, and then we can kind of talk about what I've even seen here in eastern Illinois hunting this weekend.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they give too much credence to what they see in the woods, and they think that what they see is what's happening everywhere. But during the rut, you could be having the worst hunt of your life, not seeing a single deer, and a quarter mile away, another hunter can just have tons of deer under him, have bucks chasing does and whatever. So the thing we got to remember is, we can't give too much credence to what we're seeing. It's a good starting point, but you got to remember the rut's taking place. Even if we pick the wrong stand and we don't see a deer that day, the rut's still going on. And if we would have been in the right tree, we would have probably seen a ton of deer. So I think that's one of the big, I don't know if I'd call it a mistake, but I see it with a lot of deer hunters. They think that whatever they seen is what everybody else is seeing. And in my rut report, I even have a disclaimer there at the end that, what I'm relaying is just one person's observations in a limited area. So you got to kind of take that for what it's worth.
So if you look at the calendar of what we know about pre-rut into the peak rut, then we go into lockdown. It was obvious we were in lockdown last weekend when I was in Illinois, talking about what we saw out there through into this week. Is lockdown starting to kind of wind down and bucks are starting to go cruising again, or what do you think?
I think they're still on lockdown for the most part. During gun season, kind of my tradition, I haven't gun hunted since I was in my early 20s, but which was a long time ago for anyone keeping count, over 30 years. But one of my traditions is I go out and I go for drives early in the morning at daylight and then again in the evening. cruise some of the properties that either I own, lease, or have permission to hunt on, just to get a good feel for the hunting pressure as much as anything. It's also, patrolling for trespassers, if you will, but I want to get a handle on where the hunting pressure is. Most years I'll still have a buck tag in my pocket, and I'll be hunting as soon as the gun season closes. So I want to know where the gun hunters were concentrated and where they have not been. So I know where to concentrate my efforts when the archery season opens back up on Monday morning.
Right. The point you just made about, somebody can, say, be on a hunt of the lifetime with all kinds of action, and then somebody else very close. A great example of that is I'm back up here this weekend with my friend Patrick Simpson. We always come up and hunt together gun season. He was on a different farm this morning, and he had a good buck chasing the last 2 days. He actually saw the buck yesterday chasing, and then saw him again in the nasty weather this morning. He was tough enough to set it out in a lone wolf climber and get rained and sleeted on with about a 36-degree temperature, and ended up shooting that buck this morning at around 8:30, 9 o'clock. He had all kinds of action, but just a little ways away, I saw one little scrub buck out cruising just at first light.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to see. I mean, if you don't pick the right stand, for whatever reason, like this morning, I seen a hot doe. Obviously, she was in heat. She had 5 bucks chasing her around, and I'm telling you, they were out in the middle of nowhere where nobody would look for them. But if someone would have happened to have been sitting out there this morning, they would have swore the rut was just full bore. But then other more traditional areas where I typically see deer, I drove by those and didn't see a single deer out. So it's feast or famine during the rut. You're either in the right spot or you're not, but your observation is not necessarily a good indicator of what stage of the rut or exactly what's going on. Another example, the last 2 days as I've been driving around patrolling properties and such, I've seen probably more hot does locked down with bucks out in the middle of wide open fields than I've seen all season in just those 2 days. But I also seen one mature buck yesterday morning crossing an open field, and I'm sure he wasn't bumped out by hunting pressure because I know the property he came off of and there's no gun hunting there. But that buck was obviously cruising in search of does, and he was the best buck I seen. But yet at the same morning, I seen 3 different hot does that all had multiple bucks chasing them around open fields. So if a deer hunter was in the stand and seen that big buck cruising, he'd swear the lockdown phase is over, but I know that's not the case. So you kind of got to, take your observations and factor in the date and some other factors, the weather, and then determine what phase of the rut we're really in.
So it's November 23rd today. For the guys that are going to be hunting, say, today or tomorrow, which will be the 24th, normally this is, I think, closer to what Thanksgiving is. Thanksgiving's not till next Thursday. I think we had a 5-week month this year for November. But are we still in our best attack is to find where the majority of the does are, say downwind to bedding areas, and set up there like we were a week and a half ago?
Oh, absolutely, because we're getting late enough into the month. This lockdown phase is going to slowly give way to the last seeking phase. I've said for years Thanksgiving week is a great time to kill a giant. Actually, Roger Rothar, a legendary bow hunter out of Ohio, told me probably 30 years ago or more that Thanksgiving week was the best week of the year to kill a giant, because as the rut's winding down, those big bucks, they spend more time searching between hot does. They'll leave one hot doe, and there's not another one there waiting immediately for them. So they've got to do a lot more searching, and that's exactly what's starting to happen. I mean, I think we're still pretty much on the lockdown phase, but it's only going to be a few days here, and those bucks are really going to be covering some ground searching for another hot doe.
Well, it makes sense because earlier in the month, all of these does are coming into season, right? So your mature bucks are going to be fighting and positioning themselves to get the first one and then stay locked down with those. As they finish with those, the number of does that are still in heat is much smaller. So the ground they're covering, I guess, you mentioned it a couple weeks ago. A deer uses their nose like humans use their eyes in searching for a girlfriend. So they're using that nose to cover a lot of ground to see if there's something in heat.
Right, and the thing to remember is these does are not all coming in heat at once. There's a period of about 2 weeks or so in the middle of November where it's just, it's starting about the 10th or so, maybe a day or two before, is when those does are starting to come in to heat. And by the time you get to the 15th, there's just hot does everywhere, and then it starts tapering off again once you get past the 20th. And as far as I'm concerned, the 2 best weeks in November to kill a good buck are the first week and the last week. Those 2 middle weeks when those bucks are with the hot does are a whole lot tougher. So that's just something to keep in mind. We got that last week coming up, and that's a great time to kill a giant. And, from my own experience, I remember probably 20 years ago, there was 5 consecutive seasons in a row where the biggest buck I seen from a tree stand each of those 5 seasons was during Thanksgiving weekend. Maybe not Thanksgiving Day, but that 4-day weekend from Thanksgiving to Sunday, 5 years in a row, the biggest buck I seen from a stand each of those seasons was during that period. So there's really something to that. Those bucks know that the party's just about over for another year, and they don't want to be left out. They want to get that last girlfriend before it ends.
There's another section of dialogue that I was seeing pop up on your rut report on Higgins Outdoors Facebook page, and that was when a doe fawn comes in season for the first time. And somebody mentioned, and you had a conversation with them that's more about weight than it is time. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. So you're referring to the does or the fawns that dropped this last spring, so they're not even 1 full year old yet.
Right.
So what is this conversation that you were talking about, that they cannot come into heat until they get to a certain weight?
Yeah, and this goes back to my experience with captive deer. I had a research herd of captive deer for about 25 years, and one of the things I learned in that time was that a doe fawn, her first estrus cycle is going to happen when she hits about the 80-pound mark. She hits 80 pounds, and she's going to come in heat. And most of the doe fawns, and it's not on any schedule whatsoever. People talk about the second rut. I don't believe there is such a thing as a second rut, and I kind of detailed that on that rut report. But there is rut activity after the primary rut in November, but it's just part of the whole breeding cycle of the whitetail. So, after the November rut where most of the mature does get bred, the doe fawns will be coming in heat randomly. And I believe more doe fawns probably come in heat in January than any other month. Plenty of them will come in December and some even in February and March. But I think January is the month where most of those doe fawns hit that weight where they come into that first estrus cycle. And, a lot of people would call that the third rut or whatever. All it is a doe fawn comes in heat, and she gets the attention of every buck in the area. And there is some rutting activity for a day or so, but to try to pin it down to a certain date is just about impossible.
So really this is just back to God's creation being established in such a way that they have to be so heavy or so much developed physically before they come into cycle. And when we see that late December, January, and all of a sudden people are saying, oh, it's a secondary rut, it's probably just doe fawns finally getting the weight build up to where they can do it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is for the most part. There's another misconception out there about the rut that some does do not get bred in November. They come into heat and they don't get bred, and they come back into heat 28 days later, and that triggers your second rut or whatever. Well, I don't believe that a wild doe, I think it's very rare, extremely rare, for a wild doe to come in heat and not get bred. And the reason for that is every buck in the woods is capable of breeding a doe. Even a button buck can successfully breed a doe. and they will if they get the opportunity. And you couple that fact with the fact that a buck can smell a doe in heat, I believe, from at least a mile away. So every time a doe comes in heat, that scent is going at least a mile out, and every buck alive is capable of breeding that doe. Very, very, very few wild does come into heat and don't get bred.
So if we back up and look at the rut from, say, a 30,000-foot view, what we've talked about the last couple of weeks is because the fawns don't come early, we really don't think that there's an early rut like the misconceptions of people say in October, because if that was the case, we'd start seeing doe fawns early. The rut happens at the same time. We're just seeing additional movement and activity based on the weather in late October and early November. We don't think there's really a secondary rut. The rut activity that we see late in the year and late into the winter, and those fawns that are dropped late are probably first-year doe fawns that got bred later on in the season when they got to be as a certain weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And another interesting fact from my 25 years with the captive research deer, in that 25 years, all those does that I worked with, I only had one doe come into heat in October and give birth to a fawn early the next spring. Only one doe in 25 years. That's just being an outdoor rider myself, I probably shouldn't say this, but outdoor riders perpetrate a lot of false information about whitetails. And that's another one. These does coming in heat in October. I've read some outdoor riders saying, well, the most mature doe, the dominant doe in the area, she comes in heat first in late October, and she kind of triggers the rut and blah, blah, blah. That's a bunch of garbage. It doesn't happen that way. It's just plain and simple.
If that was true, then the breeders that breed does for doe urine wouldn't have to do the things that they do to get the deer to come into estrus early so they can bottle it for hunting season. We have customers of Real World that are deer breeders, and they only just to bottle the doe urine, but they're doing things to those does chemically with medicine to get them to come into cycle early. If that was the case, they wouldn't even have to do that.
Right. It's the same way when we artificially bred does with frozen buck semen from different bucks. What you got to do is give those does a series of shots to bring them all into heat at the same time. So then when you go to breed them all at the same time, they're all at that right stage of the estrus cycle where they'll conceive. These guys that are collecting urine to sell doe and heat urine, they're giving those does this same drug early so that they can collect that doe and heat urine earlier in the season to be able to sell to hunters for the rut.
Otherwise, they would go into season the same time as
exactly. Otherwise, they would not come into heat until mid-November.
I just think that there's so much misconception about the rut, and obviously the questions and the comments that everybody makes. Just because a buck's out chasing a doe or running around bumping something in October or in January doesn't necessarily mean that. So stepping back and looking at it from 30,000-foot view, I think might help a lot of people understand it. So, like I said, Patrick and I I hunted a farm tonight just a few miles away from where he was this morning and shot that 10-pointer. I saw one 125-inch buck out, literally nose to the ground, no does in the field. He was just obviously searching, and then saw 8 or 9 does walk out into a cut cornfield, and not one buck even went out and checked them.
Mm-hmm.
So tomorrow my game plan is just going to be, we've talked about this one specific spot quite a bit on this podcast. Tomorrow I'm going to go, we got a southwest wind, and I'm going to be on the northeast side of that bedding area that usually I'm seeing 8 to 9 does coming through there every time I hunt it, hoping one of them is either hot or a buck has left whatever doe he was and is gridding that, trying to smell for a new one.
Well, that's a good plan. Like I mentioned, I think we're still in that lockdown phase, but we're fading out of it. It's not like you can just mark a date on the calendar and magically the lockdown's over and all of a sudden the bucks are all seeking again. It's a slow fade from one phase of the season to the next. or one phase of the rut to the next. So while there's a lot of bucks that are locked down, with each passing day, that lockdown is going to fade away, and there's going to be fewer bucks locked down with hot does, and those bucks are going to be searching more and become very vulnerable.
No, the good news is the buck that I want to shoot on this farm, last night I pulled trail camera cards as I was leaving hunting tonight, and on 2 different spots of the farm, I got him up in front of the 2 different cameras in 2 different spots in the middle of the night last night. So he's up doing something. So hopefully tomorrow morning he'll be searching the downwind side of that thicket. So what do you? I know you're trying to watch and learn and see bucks out in the field, and obviously checking for trespassers during gun season. But what else? What else did you get done this week preparing for next year since you're tagged out?
Well, I'm always working on next season. Even when I'm hunting this season, I'm putting things together for the following season. I'm really anxious for the gun season to get over, because then I can start inventorying the bucks that are left on the properties that I have permission to hunt, and focus on the better bucks that are left, and put the work in to be in a position to kill them next year. One thing I have done recently, more than once, actually a couple different days, is I've went out on some public ground. It's been well publicized, I think, that I want to kill a booner on public ground one of these days. And I'm always looking. The problem is finding a booner on public ground in this part of the world. Now, these guys that are out in Kansas and Iowa, it's a totally different story. You know, they want to push that public thing, but come to some of these other states and try to kill a booner on public ground, and just finding one is an absolute chore. So, you know, I've been out walking some public land, just looking for big buck sign more than anything, and potential stand sites. I don't really have an exact spot yet that I plan to hunt, but I'm just doing a lot of research on Google Earth, and actually I'm looking at some new public areas that are not even really too close to my home, more than an hour drive away. But if you can't find what you want close to home, just like you, Terry, coming clear up here from Kentucky to chase the caliber of bucks you want to chase, if I can't find a booner on public land close to home, then I'm going to have to go somewhere else to get it done.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we've talked about is, we want to set goals and try to be disciplined to what those goals are, but we want to have discipline and just I know you just going in and shooting 130, 140 inch deer on public ground just to say that you shot it on public ground isn't what you're looking for.
No, that's not going to happen. I mean, when I've got 170 inch and better bucks on private ground, there's just no way I'm walking away from that to go shoot a 150 on public. It doesn't mean that much to me, but I would like to kill a booner on public land before I hang up my bow for the last time.
All right. Well, let's transition into buyfarm.com's property of the week.
Buyafarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
This week's featured property is 350 acres in Jackson County, Illinois, near Murfreesboro. I've actually been to this farm myself. It's very unique. It sits in the oxbow of the Big Muddy River, or a oxbow of the Big Muddy River. There's over 2 miles of river frontage on this 350-acre farm. It sits at the end of a dead-end road. 150 of that acreage is tillable, and about 170 is woodland. There are 3 ponds on the property, the biggest one being about 8 acres. There's 15 acres of fenced pasture, some CRP income, a lot of deer, turkey, and waterfowl. The big thing about this property is it has 2 homes and 3 farm buildings, so it's got some improvements. I mean, you could live right on this property. Actually, a couple of families could. The main home is a 5-bedroom home, very nice, 4.5 bath, 2-story. It's got a pool, fully finished basement. The other home, the second home, is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with geothermal heat, large deck and fenced yard. The outbuildings are in very good condition. One of them is extremely big. It's 42 feet by 270 feet. Just a huge building. There's also a 40 by 60 shop with 3 garage doors, a 60 by 120 machine shed with 4 22-foot doors. It's basically a farm with 2 homes on it, but it sits in such a way right on the big muddy river that it's also a sportsman's paradise. So, somebody could buy it and sell the homes off and still have a fantastic hunting paradise there.
Well, I'm thinking you should go in and buy it, and I can take the 4.5 bedroom since I got 3 kids, and you and Robin take the other one. We'll let you come over to the pool.
I'll tell you what, I'll sell it to you for the right amount. I'll buy the whole thing, and yeah, I bet we could work something out. Probably the only disagreement's going to be on the price.
Yeah, the 42 by 270 shed, that's ginormous.
It is, and it looks that big too. I'll tell you, when I seen it, it's like, wow. Good Lord, how long is that building? And it's almost 300 feet long, and it's a giant. I mean, there's plenty of room that you could, if you was into cattle. It was actually a cattle shed, open front cattle shed, but they've got a lot of machinery stored in it now, and there's some old fence and such around. But you could turn it into a working cattle farm pretty quick.
So who's the listing agent on this one?
The agent on this one is Mark Kennedy, and Mark's phone number is 618-924-1747. And if you want to see more details, some photos and such on this property, it's 350 acres in Jackson County, Illinois, near Murfreesboro. So with that information, you ought to be able to easily find it on the buyafarm.com website.
Looks like for somebody that wanted to even, it's like you said, even selling off the homes as part of it and keeping the rest of it for hunting or farming. A lot of options with what's on that property. So,
right, and the location is great. I mean, it's not that far outside of town. Carbondale, Illinois, Southern Illinois University is close by. So, somebody that's got a connection with that university or something, or maybe retired from that university, it'd just make a great farm for someone.
All right, sounds great. We want to thank buyafarm.com, obviously, for being our primary sponsor. And even if this property isn't necessarily what you're looking for, we can obviously find a lot of different sizes and price points and different properties. One of the things that we're talking about with our sponsors, we were just talking about a little bit before we ate supper tonight, and we wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow, the 24th of November, is the last day for the big sale that Lone Wolf Tree Stands is doing on their climbers. So for those of you who are following Lone Wolf on Instagram, Facebook, and their social media, they've been posting today that tomorrow is the last day, so go out to their website. The other thing that both of us have seen here as people get ready for Black Friday shopping is there's a lot of killer deals on Vortex Optics the day after Thanksgiving. I know there's a lot of people looking for Christmas present ideas to tell the wife or the grandparents or something that they want. I think there was a set of binoculars at one retailer that was $100 off on a really good set of Vortex binos. So make sure you're checking out the sale ads and look at vortexoptics.com. So we got a few questions lined up for today. You want to dive into those, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just throw out before we get started on the questions that if you've got a question to submit, go to chasinggiants.com. If we use your question, we'll send you a free T-shirt. I can tell you that I've been sorting through questions to try to get things that are halfway related to the time of season and such. But, coming up in the off season, we're going to hit on a lot of topics. We've got some questions submitted on from young folks wanting to get into the hunting industry and just different topics like that. And probably what we'll do, later on in the spring and summer is tackle some of them topics. And if you've got a question related to that, that's probably when we're going to pull them up. So if we haven't used your question yet, don't give up. When it is applicable to the topic we're talking about that week, we'll pull it up and use it. So The first question this week comes from John Seeger from Richmond, Wisconsin. This question is one I should have used earlier in the rut, but I just had too many submitted, but we're going to go ahead and hit it this week. And John asks, so with the rut just around the corner, what is the best time during this time of the year to be in the stand? When should I focus my time to maximize my time in the field? And I think I covered this earlier. I believe that the very best week to see the most bucks in November is approximately November 5th through the 12th. I say that every year. Now, I don't know if that falls within a calendar week or not, but year after year, that 7-day period of November 5th through the 12th is always great. And then the last week, Thanksgiving week, is also the time to focus on.
So if you got vacation left over or you got off work for the week of Thanksgiving, instead of watching football, get out there in the woods. You might see some bucks out cruising, just like we were talking about a little bit before.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus your if you're one of those folks that has to work for a living and can't hunt the entire month, and you've got to focus around certain periods, focus around the first week in November and the last week in November if you want to hunt the giants.
But this goes back to a conversation we had not too long ago about people getting burnt out, because I know a lot of people, once that first gun season of Illinois, or say, I think, Patrick, does Kentucky go out of gun season tomorrow? So, they rush to the woods in October, and now they're completely burnt out. They're frustrated, and, they're just done for it, ready to just sit back and eat turkey this week. They're going to miss one of the second best weeks of hunting because they hit it too hard too early.
That's right. That's where discipline comes in, Going back to the outdoor writers, you can't pick up a magazine in the fall without somebody touting Halloween week, the last week of October, as being a prime time to kill a giant. And sure, it happens some, but your odds are a whole lot better if you wait about another week and get into November, and even 2 or 3 days into November before you really start hitting it hard. And then when you get in the middle of the month, when them bigger bucks are on lockdown, if you need to take a break, that's the time to sleep in for a couple mornings in the middle, but rejuvenate yourself so when that last week, that Thanksgiving period rolls around, you're ready to roll again.
Discipline and toughness comes into play, because I've sat in a stand for the last 2 days, and I was telling Patrick, I'm not that old, but that rain this morning with about 35, 36 degree weather sitting out in that, I'm still stiff from that, and sitting in a stand tonight and going to do a long to sit tomorrow. But again, it's part of it. It's the discipline and the toughness to be able to stick it out. So we got one more week that hopefully we can get in the field, and then everybody who wants to fill that tag will keep at it.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Terry, you've earned my respect the last couple of weeks, because I know last weekend you drove up here sick and sit out in terrible weather. I think it rained then, didn't it? And you was in the stand and sit over a plowed field. I'm telling you what, I would not have had the discipline to do that. But you drove all that way, and with the wind direction that you had to deal with, it was the best spot you had, and you made the most of it. I just wish that corn would have still been in that field, because I think you would have killed a giant if it would have been. But I got to hand it to you. You hunt hard, and you don't give up easy.
Well, and it's not over yet, because even if I shoot one tomorrow, I still have a bow tag. So
right,
late season is going to be part of the game plan in Illinois this year for sure. So let's move on to the second question.
The next question comes from Nick Scarpino from Baldwin, Missouri. Nick asked, when do you feel the best time is to start hunting close to bedding areas? Pre-rut, main rut, lockdown? I'm concerned with the amount of intrusion I make on my farm and would love your opinion. Currently, I am waiting close to peak pre-rut to sneak in close to bedding. That's pretty much exactly what I do, Nick, is I don't get into those bedding areas until about, this year, the first day I moved in to do that was November 3rd, the day I shot my first buck. That's exactly where I was sitting then. And what happens is if you move into those areas too quick, and we was just talking about that in the last question, if you're not disciplined and you move in too quick, what you do is you tip off the deer, and then even if it's just the does that are in that bedding area, and once they learn you're there, they move somewhere else, and then the bucks are going to go where the does are. So you can really shoot yourself in the foot by moving in too quick. So usually sometime around the 1st of November, I should say like from between the 1st and the 5th, depending on the weather. If it's extremely warm, then I don't move in too quick because the bucks aren't moving quite as good. But if it's cool like it was this year, around that 1st of November mark, move in and start hunting the downwind edges of those bedding covers or those bedding areas on the morning hunts. And the evening hunts, I'll stick with the edge of food sources to catch those deer coming in.
And one of the things that you're adamant about is when you do move in, under no circumstances do you give up the wind going into that bedding area.
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have
the other thing, it's the whole mentality of it's the rut, it's going to be they're chasing, and I'm moving in, and that scent blows into that bedding, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Not only for that hunt, but for follow-up hunts. So discipline, once again, discipline. You're probably going to hear me say discipline every time you turn on one of these podcasts because that's what it comes down to a lot of times. So we'll move on to the last question for this episode. It comes from Ryan Steele from Smithton, Illinois. Ryan says, every year I set out my trail cameras around the 1st of July. Typically, I try to check them once a month. Come October, I try to check them bi-weekly or weekly. This is when I really start to see pictures of mature bucks. Then as the rut passes, the pictures of mature bucks disappear. With food plots planted, how do I hold mature bucks through the winter? Shed hunting my farm has typically been pretty uneventful come March. Well, you've got the food, according to your question there, Ryan. You've got the food plots, but you also need secure bedding cover. If those bucks don't feel safe there, they will bed a mile away and get up and walk after dark. They can get up easily and walk a mile to a food source. But when that sun comes up, they want to feel secure. And my guess is that you either don't have quality bedding cover, thick thermal cover for, when the cold winds blow and it's snowing and really brutal out. And if you do have that, my guess is there's too much pressure of some sort on your bedding cover. It might not be from you. It might be from dogs or coyotes or who knows what. But it just sounds to me like there's too much pressure or those mature bucks would stay there.
I got it. This kind of feeds off of that, but I know when you just mentioned thermal cover, and I've seen this on your property before where just a little bit of a I wouldn't even call it a hill. What we have in Kentucky is hills, but you have a roll in your ground where they'll get on the backside, and we can see it with cattle out in the pasture. When you see all the cattle bunched up and just over the knoll, that wind's blowing up over them and not cutting them. Will deer use topography like that in a situation to get out of that weather?
Oh,
the same
absolutely.
way a cow will?
Yep. Without a doubt. I see it on my place all the time.
So depending on his topography and where the dominant wind is, you might have a real thick piece of woods that's gnarly and thick, but if the predominant wind through the winter is blowing into that, it might not be a great place for the deer to bed.
Right.
Was the back way of getting there.
Mm-hmm. And this question provides limited information on this property. If I was there walking it, I could tell you in a heartbeat as soon as I was done with my tour what the problem is. But it just sounds to me like there's a lack of secure quality bedding cover. And if there is quality bedding cover, it's just not secure. There's too much intrusion.
Yep. Well, these three guys are going to get a free Chasing Giants t-shirt because they went to ChasingGiants.com or HigginsOutdoors.com and went to the podcast link and submitted the question. We actually have a fourth question, but Patrick asked, but he doesn't get a t-shirt because he didn't go to ChasingGiants.com and submit it. But we're gonna let him ask it anyway. And that question before we started recording was, when do you stop hunting mornings? So we got one more week you said is going to be phenomenal with buck movement as lockdown phases out and they're searching for those does, when do you transition back to evening hunts over food sources?
Well, right at the 1st of December. I try to continue. If I've got a buck tag in my pocket, I will continue to hunt mornings until the 1st of December. And after that, it's back to evenings only. Ironically, my biggest buck ever was shot on December 1st, but it was on an evening hunt. It was not on a morning hunt. So December 1st for me, that's the trigger to go back to evenings only.
Yeah. What's your plans for going back to Ohio?
Well, I've got my daughter coming in from out of state. She's out in Connecticut. She's flying in for Thanksgiving on Wednesday, and is going to be here for a week, so I don't want to leave while she's here. But when I take her back to the airport to fly home, there's a good chance I'm going to go she's flying out of Indianapolis, so I'm going to be partway to my Ohio property anyway. I think I'm just going to drop her off and then head right on over to Ohio, which will put me there after their gun season has started. But I can still hunt with a bow during gun season in Ohio, so that's probably my plan unless weather or something else prevents me from doing that.
So talk to us a little bit about how you have this is the first year you've had this property in Ohio. Talk to us a little bit about what you have set up there for hunting late season. Did you take a 360 hunting blind out there?
There's actually 2 360 blinds on the property. A partner and I bought that property this summer, closed on it in July. And probably within 48 hours of us closing on that property, my partner had heavy equipment in there, dozers and track hoes and bobcats, and we cleared the property was 160 acres of the thickest, nastiest, woolliest stuff you ever seen. Real rough terrain. I call it mountains. You guys would probably just call it hills. But this property had a sizable flat top on this mountain, I'll call it. And so we cleared a 10-acre food plot right in the middle of the property, right on top of this mountain. We planted it in Real World's Deadly Dozen around the 1st of September. In Ohio, it's also legal to supplemental feed, so we put 3 big feeders on the property. The thing of this area lacks is good food sources. It's the weakest link in the entire area, so we wanted to address that in a big way. And we felt that with the number of deer and what's lacking in the area, that even a 10-acre food plot is probably going to get wiped out. So we supplement that with 3 big capacity feeders, and we're thinking by the time late season rolls around, we're going to have there's plenty of deer there now. But we think we're going to have a lot more, by the time Christmas hits.
Just them giving them an opportunity to find it.
Right.
I know that part of the country, mash crop is vital to those deer through September and into October. Mm-hmm. But after that's gone, the food sources are slim and few and far between. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised to go back and hunt that property around Christmas and see 50 or more deer on a hunt in that 10-acre plot, because we're going to have the food, whether it be in that plot or in a feeder. And next year when we have a little better opportunity, after buying it in the middle of July didn't leave us much chance to get a spring or didn't give us a chance at all to have a spring plot. Next year we'll plant soybeans in there. They may get wiped out. And if they do, we'll come back with a fall plot of Deadly Dozen again. But those feeders, we're going to keep them full year round. And it's only a matter of time before we kill a giant there.
This year wasn't even the best food plot season to begin with, because you probably went at least 3 weeks, if not 4 or 5, without rain in that part of the country. I know it was very similar to what we had in Kentucky.
Yeah, right. That seed was planted in dust the 1st of September, and I don't think it got a rain for about 3 weeks. If it did, it was just a sprinkling that didn't even really germinate the seed. When we went and put those 360 blinds up in September, the plots were already planted, and they were just, it was dust. We just drove the trucks right across the plots, and the dust just flew when we did, and we wasn't driving over any plants because they hadn't even germinated yet.
So, but you've been back, and they did rebound, and you got a good food source here for a late season.
Yep, sure did.
Well, as we wrap up today a little bit, I want to talk. We're getting close to officially setting dates for your master class. I think you're going to be publicizing that here in the near future. But for those of our listeners who don't really follow you and know about the services that you have, obviously you have 2 books on your website for Higgins Outdoors. If you have a deer hunter that wants to learn a little bit more, I recommended it to a good friend of mine this week. So those 2 books are available. Obviously, you have your consulting services, which I think since you've tagged out, you're already lining up some consulting jobs to get them knocked out before the first of the year, where you can go and actually visit people's properties to do land consulting.
Yeah, I've got several of those lined up already, and probably will start those shortly after Thanksgiving. Actually, once my daughter flies back home and I come back from Ohio. In fact, I may even do a couple on that trip to Ohio because I've got some consulting jobs lined up out there. Touching on a couple things you just mentioned, Terry, the books. I sell a lot of those books every year this time of the year. People give them as Christmas presents. So if you're a deer hunter and your wife needs an idea what to get you for Christmas, those books can be found on chasinggiants.com or higginsoutdoors.com. Or if you have a Christmas or a deer hunter on your list you're trying to buy for, looking for something unique, I sign all those books when they're shipped out. So they'll come autographed. Not that my signature's worth anything. I tell people it makes them worth less, but they don't cost any less. As far as the master course that you mentioned, Terry, I forget the dates. I think it's March, is it 14th and April 4th?
I think that's what we're looking at now is the 14th and the 4th.
March 14th, April 4th. There will be, you can go to my website, chasinggiants.com, and find out information on that as well. But what we do is we're going to start this year on Friday evening. So Friday evening is kind of a social hour at my place from 6 to 9. We'll have pizza and pop. Terry and I are going to do a podcast, a Chasing Giants podcast that evening live right there with the students, and those students will be able to ask questions right there in front of us, and we'll answer them, and that'll be a Chasing Giants podcast. Then on Saturday morning, the next morning, we'll meet there at my place again. We will, about half of the day will be spent in class doing a slide presentation, talking about some things. I'll show video footage from some bucks I've shot, and then we'll go out into the field on the property, and we will go right to those tree stands where I shot those bucks. So you can see right where multiple booners have been shot, the very tree stands, the very blinds, and I will explain why the stand was placed where it was at, how I access the stands, the wind direction that I use to hunt each stand, what the bucks are doing when they're walking by, why the stand is so successful because of what the bucks are doing when the wind's in a certain direction. And I explain it all, and I don't think there's any other whitetail class out there that you can go right to stands where multiple booners have been shot. You can see the proof on the video that I'm not pulling anybody's leg. I'll show you the video footage of shooting these deer. Then we're going to go right to where it happened, and you can ask questions or whatever. So if you're interested in that class, you can go to chasinggiants.com, and information will be there.
I know one of the pieces of feedback we got last year is when you look at an aerial map and you lay out a wind direction and a food plot and a bedding area, it's real easy to understand, okay, I need to park here and walk to the stand in this direction from a topo map. But what's really hard to visualize is where do I pick a tree stand for what that buck is going to be doing with a certain wind. And that's what everybody that came to that class kept talking about last year. And that's really the secret sauce when it boils down to it is a tree. The wrong tree, it might just be 20 yards away, might be a game changer in closing the deal on a buck. And it's understanding what that buck is thinking and doing with a specific wind direction that you just can't understand unless you're out walking the property. And one of the stands that we stood in front of during last year's master class for I don't know how long, probably 30, 40 minutes, because there was a lot of questions, ended up being the stand you shot the fork time buck off of.
Yeah, my first buck this year on November 3rd, yeah.
So the stand that you shot the fork time buck off just less than a month ago, it was long enough that I had to walk clear back up to the house and get something. I forget what it was.
Yeah.
I think I was loading somebody's somebody showed up to buy some real world seed or something, and I had to go up there and load it with the skid loader, and came back and you all were still there.
Right. It's one of the better stands on the farm, but I've done seminars, I've written magazine articles and books and all that, and you can try to explain things. And I've even used video in some of my seminars trying to make points, but it's really difficult when you're trying to explain how to use the wind. It's extremely difficult when you're not right there where it's happening.
Yeah, that's what makes this class very different from anything that I've ever experienced, and seeing the light bulb go off, because no one has two properties that are laid out the same way. But when they can see what that buck was thinking and what you're doing as a strategy, they can apply that to what their properties are when they go back.
Yeah, and here in recent weeks, as the ruts heated up, a lot of those students that were at that class have sent me emails or messages on social media and told me, that class was a game changer for them, because they took what they seen on my property, and after they see it, it's really easy to take it home and apply it. And they did that and talk about their buck sightings doubling for what they had been seeing on a typical week during the rut when they're on vacation or whatever. So I think we're on to something here. But the thing of it is, nobody is doing this in stands where they have actually shot booners. And even Smokey, the 206-inch buck that I shot back in 17, students can go right up into the blind. We're letting them climb up into the blind where that hunt happened, and they can just envision, after watching the video, of how Smokey came out of that bedding grass and walked along the edge of that food plot before I shot him. They're going to get to sit right in the blind where that happened, and then they can envision how everything took place and take those lessons home and make their own properties better.
Yeah, it's but yeah, go to Higgins Outdoors or ChasingGiants.com and look for the master class. Now, as far as your consulting, if people are interested in this, you've been doing land consulting for a long time, and you had your tree business, but you were a whitetail land consultant for a long time. But to be quite honest, the demand that you have and the request that you have to go to people's properties grew exponentially after Trump and Smokey in 2017. So if somebody's considering this, you're actually turning down work right now, because you look at the properties and make sure it's something you feel that you can help the client with before you agree to do it. But they need to start having dialogue with you right now and not waiting till the first of the year, so they can be considered to have you visit their property.
Yeah, I've already got a pretty substantial list of clients that I'm definitely going to visit their property. And, last year I really did just about all I could handle. And I did more than I could handle, really. We had a late spring, and that's the only reason I was able to get them all in. And things have not slowed. I raised my prices. I try to keep my price in line to keep the demand, what I can handle. But it just doesn't seem to slow people down. The desire to take your property to the next level is there to such a degree that the phone just keeps ringing. And I know what's going to happen is come January, February, March, the phone's going to continue to ring, and I'm going to have to turn people down. But, one thing I want to throw out for anyone who might be interested in this is I do things a little bit different than other consultants, is I want to start, before I ever take a dime from anyone, I want to see an aerial photo of your property. You just email me an aerial photo, and then I'll respond with about 10 questions that I ask every potential client. and I want to get a good feel for your property and your situation before I ever take a dime. And if I see something that concerns me, I can address it right then before I ever visit your property, before you ever pay me anything, and then you can decide if you still want to hire me. So there's been numerous occasions where a red flag has been thrown up because of the way someone answered a question, or maybe they've got too much hunting pressure on their property, or their property doesn't lay out good, or whatever. I want to address that before taking somebody's money, and it doesn't cost a thing. So if you're interested, just go to the website, send me an email with an aerial, and I'll respond with the questions and give you an assessment of what I think I can do. If I don't think I can help you, I'm not going to take your money.
And the other thing with communicating to you early is, you go all the way to Kansas, Ohio, Kentucky, you travel all over the place. And if you can have that schedule ahead of time to where you can hit multiples in the same geographic direction, it allows you to cover more. And if somebody calls late in the season and says, I want you to do one in Kansas, and you've already done your 2 or 3 Kansas swings, you might not be likely if you're in Ohio for that batch. So make sure you reach out to Don through the Higgins Outdoors website and look at his books, his consulting services, and also that master class. That's going to be a real good time, and I'm sure that we will get a bunch of questions that's going to be quite comical. There's going to be a lot of laughing. That's usually a good group of guys that get together. So As we wrap up, anything else you want to add today, Don?
Well, I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving this week. Keep your priorities in order. Spend time with your family. But don't forget about the deer hunting either, because that's an excellent time to kill a giant.
Yeah, so on behalf of buyAfarm.com, we want to thank our sponsors, Matthews Archery, Quiet Cat Bike, Lone Wolf Tree Stands, Real World Wildlife Products, and Vortex Optics. Did I get them all today?
I think so.
Yeah, I think I missed one last week. I actually forgot to say Real World last time, so shame on me.
I think everybody knows we're connected with Real World.
All right, guys, have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll check in next week with hopefully a buck on the ground. Take care.